1.2c Feasibility issues. Soon after you get an idea for a study, reality begins to kick in and you begin to think about whether the study is feasible at all. Several major considerations come into play. Many of these involve making trade-offs between rigor and practicality. Performing a scientific study may force you to do things you wouldn't do normally. You might want to ask everyone who used an agency in the past year to fill in your evaluation survey only to find that there were thousands of people and it would be prohibitively expensive. Or, you might want to conduct an in-depth interview on your subject of interest only to learn that the typical participant in your study won't willingly take the hour that your interview requires. If you had unlimited resources and unbridled control over the circumstances, you would always be able to do the best quality research, but those ideal circumstances seldom exist, and researchers are almost always forced to look for the best trade-offs they can find to get the rigor they desire. When you are determining a research project's feasibility, you usually need to bear in mind several practical considerations. First, you have to think about how long the research will take to accomplish. Second, you have to question whether any important ethical constraints require consideration. See Chapter 2. Third, you must determine whether you can acquire the cooperation needed to take the project to its successful conclusion. And finally, you must determine the degree to which the costs will be manageable. Failure to consider any of these factors can mean disaster later. 1.3 The language of research. Learning about research is a lot like learning about anything else. To start, you need to learn the jargon people use, the big controversies they fight over, and the different factions that define the major players. Research blends an enormous range of skills and activities. Learning about research is a lot like learning a new language. You need to develop a specialized vocabulary of terms that describe the different types of research, the methods used, and the issues and problems that arise. You need to learn how to use those words correctly in a sentence. You need to understand the local idioms of this language. Just as in any language, if you aren't aware of the subtle way words are used, you run the risk of embarrassing yourself. To begin, we'll introduce some basic ideas like the types of studies you can perform, the role of time in research, and the different types of relationships you can learn about. Then we define some basic vocabulary terms like hypothesis, variable, data, and unit of analysis. Finally, we introduce several basic terms that describe different types of thinking in research.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the live. I'm a graduate student. Today is Monday morning, so it's time to review some work, write down some notes for the upcoming week. So watch me do that if you're interested. Don't forget to subscribe for more. And, well, I've been getting started. I woke up at 6 a.m., so let's get started with you guys watching me take my notes.
1.38 Research vocabulary. We present the first two terms, theoretical and empirical, together because they are often contrasted with each other. So, just to get you warmed up to the idea that learning about research is in many ways like learning a new language, we want to introduce you to four terms that we think help describe some of the key aspects of contemporary social research. This list is far from exhaustive. It's really just the first four terms that came into our minds when we were thinking about research language. Think of these like a word of the day for the next 4 days. You might even try to work one term into your conversation each day. Go ahead, we dare you to become more at ease with this language. We present the first two terms, theoretical and empirical, together because they are often contrasted with each other. Social research is theoretical, meaning that much of it is concerned with developing, exploring, or testing the theories or ideas that social researchers have about how the world operates. It is also empirical, meaning that it is based on observations and measurements of reality, on what you perceive of the world around you. You can even think of most research as a blending of these two terms, a comparison of theories about how the world operates with observations of its operation. In the old days, many scientists thought that one major purpose of science was to measure what was really there, and some believed that we could develop measuring instruments that were perfectly accurate. Alas, experience has shown that even the most accurate of our instruments and measurement procedures inevitably have some inaccuracy in them. Whether measuring the movement of subatomic particles or the height or weight of a person, there is some error in all measurement. Thus, The third big word that describes much contemporary social research is probabilistic, or based on probabilities. The inferences made in social research have probabilities associated with them. They are seldom, if ever, intended as covering laws that pertain to all cases with certainty. Part of the reason statistics has become so dominant in social research is that it enables the estimation of the probabilities for the situations being studied. The last term we want to introduce is causal. You have to be careful with this term. Note that it is spelled causal, not casual. You'll really be embarrassed if you write about the casual hypothesis in your study. Beware the automatic spell checker. The term causal has to do with the idea of cause and effect. Cook and Campbell, 1979. A lot of social researchers are interested at some point in looking at a cause-effect or causal relationship. For instance, we might want to know whether a new program causes improved outcomes or performance. Now, don't get us wrong. There are lots of studies that don't look at cause and effect relationships. Some studies simply observe. For instance, a survey might be used to describe the percentage of people holding a particular opinion. Many studies explore relationships. For example, a study may attempt to determine whether there is a relationship between gender and salary. Probably the vast majority of applied social research consists of these descriptive and correlational studies. So why are we talking about causal studies? Because for most social sciences, it is important to go beyond just passively observing the world or looking at relationships. You might like to be able to change the world, to improve it and help address some of its major problems. If you want to change the world, especially if you want to do this in an organized, scientific way, you are automatically interested in causal relationships, ones that tell how causes, for example, programs and treatments, affect the outcomes of interest. 1. 1.
Black pen. Yeah, this pen is messed up. Black pen. It's blue.
Research projects usually can be classified into one of three basic forms. Descriptive studies are designed primarily to document what is going on or what exists. Public opinion polls that seek to describe the proportion of people who hold various opinions are primarily descriptive in nature. For instance, if you want to know what percentage of the population would vote for a Democrat or Republican in the next presidential election, you are simply interested in describing something. Relational studies look at the relationships between two or more variables. A public opinion poll that compares the proportion of males and females who say they would vote for a Democratic or Republican candidate in the next presidential election is essentially studying the relationship between gender and voting preference. Causal studies are designed to determine whether one or more variables, for example, a program or treatment variable, causes or affects one or more outcome variables. If you performed a public opinion poll to try to determine whether a recent political advertising campaign changed voter preferences, you would essentially be studying whether the campaign cause changed the proportion of voters who would vote Democratic or Republican. Effect. The three study types can be viewed as cumulative. That is, a relational study generally assumes that you can first describe, by measuring or observing, each of the variables you are trying to relate. A causal study generally assumes that you can describe both the cause and effect variables and that you can show that they are related to each other. Time is an important element of any research design, and here we want to introduce one of the most fundamental distinctions in research design nomenclature: cross-sectional versus longitudinal studies. Cross-sectional studies take place at a single point in time. In effect, you are taking a slice or cross-section of whatever it is you're observing or measuring. Longitudinal studies take place over multiple points in time. In a longitudinal study, you measure your research participants on at least two separate occasions or at least 2 points in time. When you measure at different time points, we often say that you are measuring multiple waves of measurement. Just as with the repeated motion of the waves in the ocean or of waving with your hand, multiple waves of measurement refers to taking measurements on a variable several times. A further distinction is made between two types of longitudinal designs: repeated measures and time series. There is no universally agreed upon rule for distinguishing between these two terms. But in general, if you have two or a few waves of measurement, you are using a repeated measures design. If you have many waves of measurement over time, you have a time series.
Welcome to the live to all the new people. I'm doing my work, taking notes. So don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hopefully you learn something along with me.
A relationship refers to the correspondence between two variables. See the next section on variables in this chapter. When you talk about types of relationships, you can mean that in at least two ways: the nature of the relationship or the pattern of it. The nature of a relationship. We start by making a distinction between two types of relationships: a correlational relationship and a causal relationship. A correlational relationship simply says that two things perform in a synchronized manner. For instance, economists often talk of a correlation between inflation and unemployment. When inflation is high, unemployment also tends to be high. When inflation is low, unemployment also tends to be low. The two variables are correlated. But knowing that two variables are correlated does not tell whether one causes the other. For instance, there is a correlation between the number of roads built in Europe and the number of children born in the United States. Does that mean that if fewer children are desired in the United States, there should be a cessation of road building in Europe? Or does it mean that if there aren't enough roads in Europe, US citizens should be encouraged to have more babies? Of course not. At least, we hope not. While there is a relationship between the number of roads built and the number of babies, it's not likely that the relationship is a causal one. A causal relationship is a synchronized relationship between two variables, just as a correlational relationship is, but in a causal relationship we say that one variable causes.
I have to re-listen to that.
A correlational relationship simply says that two things perform in a synchronized manner. For instance, economists often talk of a correlation between inflation and unemployment. When inflation is high, unemployment also tends to be high. When inflation is low, unemployment also tends to be low. The two variables are correlated. But knowing that two variables are correlated does not tell whether one causes the other. For instance, there is a correlation between the number of roads built in Europe and the number of children born in the United States. Does that mean that if fewer children are desired in the United States, there should be a cessation of road building in Europe? Or does it mean that if there aren't enough roads in Europe, US citizens should be encouraged to have more babies? Of course not. At least, we hope not. While there is a relationship between the number of roads built and the number of babies, it's not likely that the relationship is a causal one. A causal relationship is a synchronized relationship between two variables, just as a correlational relationship is, but in a causal relationship we say that one variable causes the other to occur. This leads to consideration of what is often termed the third variable or missing variable problem. In the example considered above, it may be that a third variable is causing both the building of roads and the birth rates and leading to the correlation that is observed. For instance, perhaps the general world economy is responsible for both. When the economy is good, more roads are built in Europe and more children are born in the United States. The key lesson here is that you have to be careful when you interpret correlations. If you observe a correlation between the number of hours students use the computer to study and their grade point averages, with high computer users getting higher grades, you cannot assume that the relationship is causal, that computer use improves grades. In this case, the third variable might be socioeconomic status. Richer students, who have greater resources at their disposal, tend to both use computers more and make better grades. Resources, the third variable, may drive both use and grades. Computer use doesn't cause the change in the grade point averages. Patterns of relationships. Several terms describe the major different types of patterns one might find in a relationship. First, there is the case of no relationship at all. If you know the values on one variable, you don't know anything about the values on the other. For instance, we suspect that there is no relationship between the length of the lifeline on your hand and your grade point average. If we know your GPA, we don't have any idea how long your lifeline is. Graph A in the upper left of figure 1.3 shows the case where there is no relationship. Figure 1.3. Graphs of the different types of relationships between two variables. Graphs of the different types of relationships between two variables. Then, there is the positive relationship. In a positive relationship, high values on one variable are associated with high values on the other, and low values on one are associated with low values on the other. Graph B in the upper right of figure 1.3 shows an idealized positive relationship between years of education and the salary one might expect to be making. On the other hand, a negative relationship implies that high values on one variable are associated with low values on the other. This is also sometimes termed an inverse relationship. Graph C in the lower left of figure 1.3 shows an idealized negative relationship between a measure of self-esteem and a measure of paranoia in psychiatric patients. Patience. These are the simplest patterns of relationships that might typically be estimated in research. However, the pattern of a relationship can be more complex than this. For instance, graph D in the lower right of figure 1.3 shows a relationship that changes over the range of both variables, a curvilinear relationship. In this example, the horizontal axis represents the dosage of a drug for an illness and the vertical axis represents the severity of illness measure. As the dosage rises, the severity of illness goes down. But at some point, the patient begins to experience negative side effects associated with too high a dosage, and the severity of illness begins to increase again. An hypothesis is a specific statement of prediction. It describes in concrete, rather than theoretical, terms what you expect to happen in your study. Not all studies have hypotheses. Sometimes a study is designed to be exploratory. See the section, Deduction and Induction, later in this chapter. There is no formal hypothesis, and perhaps the purpose of the study is to explore some area more thoroughly to develop some specific hypothesis or prediction that can be tested in future research. A single study may have one or many hypotheses. Actually, whenever we talk about an hypothesis, we are really thinking simultaneously about two hypotheses. Let's say that you predict that there will be a relationship between two variables in your study. The way to set up the hypothesis test is to formulate two hypothesis statements, one that describes your prediction and one that describes all the other possible outcomes with respect to the hypothesized relationship. Your prediction might be that variable A and variable B will be related. In this example, you don't care whether it's a positive or negative relationship. Then the only other possible outcome would be that variable A and variable B are not related. Usually,
I learned about this in January. I'm gonna get my old. Statistical. It's just the same thing they keep teaching people over and over again. Guys, all this is just like a review. I mean, I learned about this when I was an undergrad, and I learned about it in January when I took a class. I just repeating everything. But I still gotta read the stuff as a refresher. But I already have notes and all this if I go back in my old books. I'll do that later. I just wanted to find the book. But I already learned this. They charge me money. Same thing I already learned. I guess pro tip, if any undergrads are watching this and you want to go to grad school, majoring in psychology is not a bad idea. Because I already learned all this.
usually, the hypothesis that you support your prediction is called the alternative hypothesis, and the hypothesis that describes the remaining possible outcomes is termed the null hypothesis. Sometimes a notation like or is used to represent the alternative hypothesis or your prediction, and or to represent the null case. You have to be careful here, though. In some studies, your prediction might well be that there will be no difference or change. In this case, you are essentially trying to find support for the null hypothesis and you are opposed to the alternative. Marriott, 1990. If your prediction specifies a direction, the null hypothesis automatically includes both the no difference prediction and the prediction that would be opposite in direction to yours. This is called a one-tailed hypothesis. For instance, let's imagine that you are investigating the effects of a new treatment for depression and that you believe one of the outcomes will be that there will be less depression. Your two hypotheses might be stated something like this. The null hypothesis for this study is, as a result of the new program, there will either be no significant difference in depression or there will be a significant increase, which is tested against the alternative hypothesis. As a result of the new program, there will be a significant decrease in depression. In Figure 1.4, this situation is illustrated graphically. The alternative hypothesis, your prediction that the program will decrease depression, is shown there. The null must account for the other two possible conditions. No difference, or an increase in depression. The figure shows a hypothetical distribution of depression difference scores. That is, a value of 0 means that there has been no difference in depression observed, a positive value means that depression has increased, and a negative value means it has decreased. The term one-tailed refers to the tail of the distribution on the outcome variable. Figure 1.4. One-tailed hypothesis test. One-tailed hypothesis test. When your prediction does not specify a direction, you have a two-tailed hypothesis. For instance, let's assume that you are studying a new drug treatment for depression. The drug has gone through some initial animal trials, but has not yet been tested on humans. You believe, based on theory and the previous research, that the drug will have an effect, but you are not confident enough to hypothesize a direction and say the drug will reduce depression. After all, you've seen more than enough promising drug treatments come along that eventually were shown to have severe side effects that actually worsened symptoms. In this case, you might state the two hypotheses like this. The null hypothesis for this study is: as a result of 300 milligrams per day of the ABC drug, there will be no significant difference in depression, which is tested against the alternative hypothesis. Hypothesis. As a result of 300 milligrams per day of the ABC drug, there will be a significant difference in depression. Figure 1.5 illustrates this two-tailed prediction for this case. Again, notice that the term two-tailed refers to the tails of the distribution for your outcome variable. Figure 1.5. Two-tailed hypothesis test. Two-tailed hypothesis test. The important thing to remember about stating hypotheses is that you formulate your prediction, directional or not, and then you formulate a second hypothesis that is mutually exclusive of the first and incorporates all possible alternative outcomes for that case. When your study analysis is completed, the idea is that you will have to choose between the two hypotheses. If your prediction was correct, you would usually reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative. If your original prediction was not supported in the data, you will accept the null hypothesis and reject the alternative. The logic of hypothesis testing, Marriott, 1990, is based on these two basic principles. Two mutually exclusive hypothesis statements that, together, exhaust all possible outcomes, need to be developed. The hypotheses must be tested so that one is necessarily accepted and the other rejected. Okay, we know it's a convoluted, awkward, and formalistic way to ask research questions, but it encompasses a long tradition in science and statistics called the hypothetico-deductive model, Nagel, 1979, Popper, 1959, and sometimes things are just done because they're traditions. And anyway, if all of this hypothesis testing was easy enough that anybody could understand it, how do you think statisticians and methodologists would stay employed? 1.3f. Variables. You won't be able to do much in research unless you know how to talk about variables. A variable is any entity that can take on different values. Okay, so what does that mean? Anything that can vary can be considered a variable. For instance, Age can be considered a variable because age can take different values for different people or for the same person at different times. Similarly, country can be considered a variable because a person's country can differ from another's, and each can be assigned a value. Variables aren't always quantitative or numerical. The variable gender consists of two values expressed in words, male and female. These values of the variable gender can be called text values to differentiate them from numeric values. However, if it is useful, quantitative values like 1 for female and 2 for male can be assigned instead of or in place of the words. But it's not necessary to assign numbers for something to be a variable. It's also important to realize that variables aren't the only things that are measured in the traditional sense. For instance, in much social research and in program evaluation, the treatment or program, i.e., the cause, is considered to be a variable. An educational program can have varying amounts of time on task, classroom settings, student-teacher ratios, and so on. Therefore, even the program can be considered a variable, which can be made up of a number of subvariables. An attribute is a specific value on a variable. For instance, the variable sex or gender has two attributes, male and female, or the variable agreement might be defined in a particular study as having 5 attributes. 1 equals strongly disagree. 2 equals disagree. 3 equals neutral. 4 equals agree. 5 equals strongly agree. Another important distinction having to do with the term variable is the distinction between an independent and dependent variable. This distinction is particularly relevant when you are investigating cause-effect relationships. This can often be a tricky distinction to understand. Are you someone who gets confused about the signs for arrivals and departures at airports? Do you go to arrivals because you're arriving at the airport, or does the person you're picking up go to arrivals because they're arriving on the plane? Some people mistakenly think that an independent variable is one that would be free to vary or respond to some program or treatment, and that a dependent variable must be one that depends on your efforts, that is, it's the treatment. However, this is entirely backwards. In fact, the independent variable is what you, or nature, manipulates, a treatment or program or cause. The dependent variable is what you presume to be affected by the independent variable, your effects or outcomes. For example, if you are studying the effects of a new educational program on student achievement, the program is the independent variable and your measures of achievement are the dependent ones. Or, if you are looking at the effects of a new surgical treatment for cancer on rates of mortality for vet cancer, the independent variable would be the surgical treatment and the dependent variable would be the mortality rates. The independent variable is what you, or nature, do, and the dependent variable is what results from that. Finally, the attributes of a variable should be both exhaustive and mutually exclusive. Each variable's attributes should be exhaustive, meaning that they should include all possible answerable responses. For instance, if the variable is religion and the only options are Protestant, Jewish, and Muslim, there are quite a few religions we can think of that haven't been included. The list does not exhaust all possibilities. On the other hand, if you exhaust all the possibilities with some variables, religion being one of them, you would simply have too many responses. The way to deal with this is to list the most common attributes and then use a general category like other to account for all remaining ones. In addition to being exhaustive, the attributes of a variable should be mutually exclusive, meaning that no respondent should be able to have 2 attributes simultaneously. While this might seem obvious, it is often rather tricky in practice. For instance, you might be tempted to represent the variable educational status by asking the respondent to check one of the following response attributes: high school degree, some college, 2-year college degree, 4-year college degree, and graduate degree. However, these attributes are not mutually exclusive. A person who has a 2-year or 4-year college degree also could correctly check some college. In fact, if someone went to college, got a 2-year degree, then got a 4-year degree, they could check all 3. The problem here is that you are asking the respondent to provide a single response to a set of attributes that are not mutually exclusive. But don't researchers often use questions on surveys to ask the respondent to check all that apply and then list a series of categories? Yes, but technically speaking, each of the categories in a question like that is its own variable and is treated dichotomously as either checked or unchecked, attributes that are mutually exclusive.
gonna eat some cereal. I'm gonna set a 15-minute timer. I have a writing center appointment at 9, so my breakfast break is normally like 15 minutes in the morning. So that timer is set. Let's make some breakfast. Good morning, everyone. For breakfast today, something quick and easy. Lucky Charms. But I was doing research methods. That's what it was. Advanced research methods. Hello everyone, welcome. I'm eating breakfast, taking a 15-minute breakfast break, and then back to my schoolwork. For this week, I have a quiz for one of my classes, but I'm gonna take that tomorrow. And then, so I'm basically reviewing for that class. But what I'm reading now is next week's reading. So, yeah. What do you guys have for breakfast? I have 15 minutes, so feel free to ask a question. Curious to know what you guys ate for breakfast. It's good when it's crunchy. When it gets soggy, not that good, the cereal. Thing about graduate school, guys, you got to do the reading before you go to class, so you understand what the professor is teaching you. But like I said, this first or second week, it's just a review on like what I already learned. I mean, I get why they do it because obviously people have different educational backgrounds, undergrad and grad school, but if you already took the classes, you should be exempt in a way, but they're not going to do that. Hey, welcome to the live, guys. Please do consider subscribing. We're only like 4 people away from 780 subscribers. For more videos like this, eat with me, watching me do my schoolwork. I'm a graduate student, so I want to make my videos real for you guys. It's not always fun and going outside and stuff like that. I don't know if I'll finish this reading today. Probably won't, and that's okay if I don't, because like I said, I'm reading ahead, and this is a lot of pages in this textbook, or this chapter to read, so. I'll go to my writing center appointment at 9, and then I'm gonna edit my discussion post, add some more details to it. And then after that, I think I'll take a break. It might be lunchtime around then, so I'll eat my lunch. And then I have to work on a presentation, just like edit it, final, because for my graduate research assistant, I have to send that off to my professor. So I just have to add the finishing touches to that one. That's why I said next week, Monday, I'm going to be a lot more busy. I'm just like moving. I'm not moving slow. I just have a quiz to take. And since it's like the first official quiz, I'm kind of nervous to take that. I'm always nervous to take the first quiz because you don't know what the module is going to be like. And it's timed and everything. So I just want to take that quiz tomorrow. So today I'm just reviewing for that quiz. So once I understand, like, okay, how the professor asks questions going forward, I'll be able to take the quiz on Mondays. Thing. It's kind of cold in here. Welcome to the live. I'm eating breakfast right now. Purpose of this live stream is basically to watch me doing my schoolwork or take notes. So I think you could learn some stuff about it, about research methods. So hey, graduate school education you're getting for free on this live stream from a textbook. So I would subscribe and stay if I was you. I have to wash this, guys. I'll be right back. Cold in here. So I got a blanket because I don't like it hot. So I'd rather be cold than hot, and I could cover up with a blanket. Alright guys, there is 5 minutes left on the timer. Morning. Hi, good morning. Welcome to the live. I'm about to start back with my schoolwork since nobody posted any questions while I was eating breakfast. Let's just get back into it. Oh, what I'm doing, I am completing my graduate schoolwork right now. So I just finished eating breakfast, 4 minutes left on my timer for my break. In graduate school, to be successful, I realized you have to work ahead and you have to read the textbook and take notes before you go to your in-person lecture. So for this reading right now that I'm doing, Advanced Research Methods for Criminal Justice, I'm reading ahead for next week because I'm not stuck for the week work for this week, but I'm in a place where saying I have a quiz tomorrow, but I'm still reviewing for that quiz since it's the first one. Already did that this morning. I'll do it again later on. And then for my other class, I have to go to the writing center, so can't submit any work for that class until I go to the writing center. So basically, I'm just taking notes for my class. So if that interests you, please stay around. Definitely consider subscribing to the channel, guys. We are only about 4 people away from 780 subscribers. Let me see something. What? Yeah, we're about 4 people away from 780 subscribers. So definitely, guys, subscribe, like the video, and you can potentially be the 780th subscriber. So let's get back to my work, please, because I do not want to be sitting out here all day doing this. That's the benefit of waking up early. Get to work ahead and you finish a little sooner with your day.
Data will be discussed in lots of places in this text, but here we just want to make a fundamental distinction between 2 types of data, qualitative and quantitative. Typically, data are called quantitative if they are in numerical form and qualitative if they are not. Note that qualitative data could be much more than just words or text. Photographs, videos, sound recordings, and so on can be considered qualitative data. Personally, while we find the distinction between qualitative and quantitative data to have some utility, we think most people focus too much on the differences between them, and that can lead to all sorts of confusion. In some areas of social research, the qualitative-quantitative distinction has led to protracted arguments, with the proponents of each claiming the superiority of their kind of data over the other. The quantitative types argue that their data are hard, rigorous, credible, and scientific. The qualitative proponents counter that their data are sensitive, nuanced, detailed, and contextual. For many of us in social research, this kind of polarized debate has become less than productive. Additionally, it obscures the fact that qualitative and quantitative data are intimately related to each other. All quantitative data are based upon qualitative judgments, and all qualitative data can be summarized and manipulated numerically. For instance, think about a common quantitative measure in social research, a self-esteem scale. The most common such scales use simple text items like, I feel good about myself, and have respondents rate them on a 1 to 5 scale where 1 equals strongly disagree and 5 equals strongly agree. We add up the responses to all of these items to get a total self-esteem score. Because the measure ultimately yields a number, it is considered a quantitative measure. But the researchers who developed such instruments had to make countless qualitative judgments in constructing them: how to define self-esteem, how to distinguish it from other related concepts, how to word potential scale items, how to make sure the items would be understandable to the intended respondents, what kinds of contexts they could be used in, what kinds of cultural and language constraints might be present, and so on. Researchers who decide to use such a scale in their studies have to make another set of judgments: how well the scale measures the intended concept, how reliable or consistent it is, how appropriate it is for the research context and intended respondents, and so on. Believe it or not, even the respondents make many judgments when filling out such a scale: what various terms and phrases mean, why the researcher is giving this scale to them, how much energy and effort they want to expend to complete it, and so on. Even the consumers and readers of the research make judgments about the self-esteem measure and its appropriateness in that research context. What may look like a simple, straightforward, cut-and-dried quantitative measure is actually based on lots of qualitative judgments made by many different people. On the other hand, all qualitative information can be easily converted into quantitative, and many times doing so would add considerable value to your research. The simplest way to do this is to divide the qualitative information into categories and number them. We know that sounds trivial, but even simply assigning a number to each category can often enable you to organize and process qualitative information more efficiently. Perhaps a more typical example of converting qualitative data into quantitative is when we do a simple content coding. For example, imagine that you have a written survey, and as the last question, you ask the respondent to provide any additional written comments they might wish to make. What do you do with such data? A straightforward approach would be to read through all of the comments from all respondents and, as you're doing so, develop a list of categories into which they can be classified. Once you have a simple classification or coding scheme, you can go back through the statements and assign the best code to each specific comment. If you use a computer to analyze these comments, you might summarize the results by counting the number of comments in each category. Or, you might use percentages to describe what percent of all comments each category constitutes. This is a simple example of coding qualitative data so that they can be summarized quantitatively. There are more sophisticated approaches for analyzing qualitative data quantitatively. See, for example, the discussion of content analysis in Chapter 3, but the essential point should be clear. Qualitative and quantitative data are intimately related, and we often move from one form to another in the course of a research project. 1.3 hours. The unit of analysis. One of the most important ideas in a research project is the unit of analysis. The unit of analysis is whatever entity you are analyzing in your study. For instance, any of the following could be a unit of analysis in a study: individuals, groups, artifacts, books, photos, newspapers. Geographical units: town, census tract, state. Social interactions: dyadic relations, divorces, arrests. For instance, if you conduct a survey where you ask individuals to tell you their opinions about something, and you combine their responses to get some idea of what that typical individual thinks, your unit of analysis is the individual. On the other hand, if you collect data about crime rates in major cities in the country, your unit of analysis would be the city. Why is it called the unit of analysis and not something else, like the unit of sampling? Because it is the analysis you do in your study that determines what the unit is. For instance, if you are comparing the children in two classrooms on achievement test scores, the unit is the individual child because you have a score for each child. On the other hand, if you are comparing the two classes on noise levels, your unit of analysis is the group, in this case the classroom, because you will measure noise for the class as a whole, not separately for each individual student. For different analyses in the same study, you may have different units of analysis. If you decide to base an analysis on student scores, the individual student is the unit. However, you might decide to compare average achievement test performance for the students with the classroom climate score. In this case, the data that go into the analysis include a variable, achievement, where the student is the unit of analysis, and a variable, classroom climate, where the classroom is. In many areas of social research, these hierarchies of analysis units have become particularly important and have spawned a whole area of statistical analysis referred to as hierarchical modeling. In education, for instance, where a researcher might want to compare classroom climate data with individual student-level achievement data, hierarchical modeling allows you to include data at these two different levels within the same analysis without averaging the individual student data first. 1.3 1.3 hours. 1.3i. Deduction and induction. In logic, a distinction is often made between two broad methods of reasoning known as the deductive and inductive approaches. Deductive reasoning works from the more general to the more specific. See Figure 1.6. Sometimes this is informally called a top-down approach. You might begin with a theory about your topic of interest. You then narrow that down into more specific hypotheses that you can test. You narrow down even further when you collect observations to address the hypotheses. This ultimately leads you to be able to test the hypotheses with specific data, a confirmation or not of your original theories. Figure 1.6. Deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning works.
Start with theory, yeah. Okay.
Works the other way, moving from specific observations to broader generalizations and theories. See Figure 1.7. Informally, this is sometimes called a bottom-up approach. Please note that it's bottom-up and not bottoms-up, which is the kind of thing the bartender says to customers when he's trying to close for the night. In inductive reasoning, you begin with specific observations and measures, detect initial patterns and regularities, formulate some tentative hypotheses that you can explore, and finally end up developing some general conclusions or theories. Figure 1.7. Inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning. These two methods of reasoning have a different feel to them when you're conducting research. Inductive reasoning, by its nature, is more open-ended and exploratory, especially at the beginning. Deductive reasoning is narrower in nature and is concerned with testing or confirming hypotheses. Even though a particular study may look like it's purely deductive, for example, an experiment designed to test the hypothesized effects of some treatment on some outcome, most social research involves both inductive.
Somebody emailed me. Your reminder. Emailed me.
Inductive and deductive reasoning processes at some time in the project. In fact, it doesn't take rocket scientists to see that you could assemble the two graphs from Figure 1.5 and 1.6 into a single circular one that continually cycles from theories down to observations and back up again to theories. Even in the most constrained experiment, the researchers might observe patterns in the data that lead them to develop new theories. 1.4. The structure of research. Notice that both ends of the hourglass represent the realm of ideas. You probably think of research as something abstract and complicated. It can be, but you'll see, we hope, that if you understand the basic logic or rationale that underlies research, it's not nearly as complicated as it might seem at first glance. A research project has a well-known structure, a beginning, middle, and end. We introduce the basic stages of a research project in the following section titled, Structure of Research. Here, we also introduce some important distinctions in research, the different types of questions you can ask in a research project, and the major components or parts of a research project. Most research projects share the same general structure. You might think of this structure as following the shape of an hourglass as shown in Figure 1.8. The research process usually starts with a broad area of interest, the initial problem that the researcher wishes to study. For instance, the researcher could want to investigate how to use computers to improve the performance of students in mathematics, but this initial interest is far too broad to study in any single research project. It might not even be addressable in a lifetime of research. The researcher has to narrow the question down to one that can reasonably be studied in a research project. This might involve formulating a hypothesis or a focus question. For instance, the researcher might hypothesize that a particular method of computer instruction in math will improve the ability of elementary school students in a specific district. At the narrowest point of the research hourglass, the researcher is engaged in direct measurement or observation of the question of interest. This is the point at which the rubber hits the road and the researcher is most directly involved in interacting with the environment within which the research is being conducted. Figure 1.8. The hourglass structure of research. The hourglass structure of research. Once the basic data are collected, the researcher begins trying to understand it, usually by analyzing it in a variety of ways. Even for a single hypothesis, there are a number of analyses a researcher might typically conduct. At this point, the researcher begins to formulate some initial conclusions about what happened as a result of the computerized math program. Finally, the researcher often will attempt to address the original broad question of interest by generalizing from the results of this specific study to other related situations. For instance, on the basis of strong results indicating that the math program had a positive effect on student performance, the researcher might suggest that other school districts similar to the one in the study might expect similar results. Notice that both ends of the hourglass represent the realm of ideas and the research questions that guide the project. The hourglass center is the most concrete or specific part of the process. The parts in between show how we translate the research questions into procedures for measurement, top part of the hourglass, and how we translate the data we observe into conclusions and new or revised questions, bottom part. 1.48 Components of a research study. What are the basic components or parts of a research study? Here, we describe the basic components involved in a causal study. Remember that earlier in the chapter, see the section, Types of Studies, you learned that causal studies build on descriptive and relational questions. Therefore, many of the components of causal studies will also be found in descriptive and relational studies. Most social research originates from some general problem or question. You might, for instance, be interested in examining which programs help to prevent and reduce childhood obesity, Foster et al. 2008. Usually, the problem is broad enough that you could not hope to address it adequately in a single research study. Consequently, the problem is typically narrowed down to a more specific research question that can be addressed. The research question is often stated in the context of some.
Right, guys, it is time to go to the writing center. So I think I'm gonna log off now and do everything else that I have to do, and then I'll log back in for lunch. So hopefully you enjoyed this video watching me do some of my schoolwork for today. I'm not done, but I'll do everything else off live. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll be back with more videos soon, guys. Bye.